So you started up the game, you've pressed any key, or perhaps the start button, and loading. Sometimes it's a quick load, sometimes it's a slow burn. And whether you swapped out for a solid state drive or not, loading happens. So what, besides reticulating splines, is legitimately going on here? Hi folks, Falcon here, and today Gameranx wants to ask the question, what actually happens when a game is loading? Life is short, right? Nobody likes spending that time waiting for something. In fact, you could probably make the argument that's why the hype train can get to such a fever pitch, chugging along those tracks. People are just frothing at the mouth for something to happen. But even when that anticipation is satisfied and you get the brand new game in your hands, you're still not done waiting. I'm talking about the dreaded loading screen. You'd think by now they'd figure out a way around that, right? It's only been a thorn in your spine since, oh, you've been gaming, and that statement is true no matter how old you are, period. Here's the thing you're probably not gonna like to hear. There isn't a way around that. They might someday bring loading time down to such a small amount, or figure out a way to do it in the background while other things are happening to the point where it feels like there's no loading time, but unless there's some sort of fundamental change in the way that computing technology works, loading is always going to be necessary. And while I'm probably not going to make it so that you're no longer irritated by it, it might seem less of an overall annoyance, at very least, to understand it. So all of your game data is located on your hard drive or your solid state drive. That's permanent storage, and it's also slower than RAM, even solid state drives. At bare minimum, while a game is loading, it copies all of the data that is necessary for what you're doing right now into the RAM. Now, a lot of the time, data stored, like textures or music or sound effects, are stored in a format that can't automatically be used. For instance, they may be packed in a large file that contains a lot of things. Textures.pak, for instance. A pack file is kind of like a game version of a zip file, except oftentimes they're proprietary or licensed technology. The purpose of this can range from either making the game take up less space on your hard drive to ensuring that the game's assets are protected from people copying or modifying them. So it may need to unpack, which, to translate it over to more common use for a consumer, unzip. Next, those files might be run through a series of processes that take that raw data and make it usable, which may include downloading external data, as there may be updates or outside assets that change on a regular basis that could be pulled from the internet. Next, pre-calculation, which can include calculating trajectories, rendering vector graphics into raster, which essentially means taking data that was created with math and making it into a visual, so you can see it, and generally doing a lot of math work that you need done in order for the game to continue. They're large loops of math that is asking various logic questions and needs to constantly answer them. In order to get to a beginning state, all those questions need to be answered at least once. There's also initialization that needs to happen, which, if you ever wonder why you see about 100 company logos before you get to the title screen, it's because there's a lot of different technologies integrated into the game. Everything in the game is some type of process on its own and needs to be started. And whether they are a full-blown module that runs on its own independently of everything else, or if it's just a library that's called on, that stuff needs to be brought into the RAM, and in some cases executed. And I could make a capital punishment joke here, but I can't think of anything that might seem more overplayed, so instead I went meta. Ooh, meta. Another thing done during loading is garbage collection, and if you can imagine all of the processes getting rid of all that stuff they don't need, bagging it up and putting it on the curb, and Mario and Luigi show up in a dump truck unshaven and frankly very dirty. And that's not a criticism, they've been working with trash all day, it's inevitable. Throw it in the back and haul it away to be burnt in a field, or decomposed, because that's pretty much what a landfill is, right? We can't just leave our trash everywhere, right? Space is limited in this world and we don't want to spend it scrunched up with a bunch of garbage. So thanks to hypothetical Mario and Luigi for that mnemonic device. To bring it back to the real world, there's always going to be less RAM than there is hard drive space. So the amount of that is always going to be limited, or at least considered limited. Any space that gets taken up by something that's not going to be used needs to be done. Because although all these things are being done while you're initializing the game, as you're executing the game, all of these things continue to happen, and the RAM continues to be used. Remember I said a few minutes ago that a game is a constant loop of logic questions that are being asked over and over again. So while quote-unquote loading, you want as little use useless stuff taking up RAM as possible. Okay, so there's a lot of complicated things that happen during loading. Why don't we just move everybody over to an SSD? Isn't that kind of like RAM? Not really. While both an SSD and RAM don't have moving parts, that's kind of where the similarities end. The underlying technology is different, and therefore performance is just not equal. In fact, the fastest SSD transfers at a rate about 500 megabytes per second, which is blazing fast compared to a hard drive. And yes, this is due to the fact that there are no moving parts. It's not based on a magnetic disk that has to be rotated to find the data that you're looking for. But the fastest RAM out there can actually transfer at around 17,000 megabytes per second, and there's not really any reason to imagine that SSDs are going to miraculously just catch up to that, because RAM has frankly had a massive head start in technology. RAM has been around for a long time. Part of the reason it can move that fast is because RAM comes in limited amounts, and because RAM comes in limited amounts, it can't be used as permanent internal storage. And if it can't be used as permanent internal storage, and in order to have a game play in a timely fashion, the much higher data transfer rates are necessitated, then the current system of loading everything into the RAM is essentially the only system. And in truth, the necessity for loading everything before the game is starting to become less and less. However, at current technology rates, we aren't expecting that to go away entirely. That doesn't mean we're always going to be stuck with this exact same process, and doing in-game loading, especially with large games that contain large worlds that you don't necessarily need to see the entirety of at once, is a great way to compensate. Hopefully at some point data transfer rates are at such a point where an SSD is the equivalent in speed of RAM, or at least is the equivalent of right now's speed in RAM. Computers would run impossibly fast if that were the case. If you've upgraded any of your systems, whether it be a game console or your computer, from a hard drive to an SSD, you know the difference in performance overall is a lot better. And there are certainly more processes than just what I explained there, but that's kind of the basic building blocks, what you really need to know is happening, because if that stuff didn't happen, there wouldn't be a game. As the game is developed, the concepts that are developed constantly necessitate new systems, which then require more loading processes. So I'd like to hope you walk away from this a little bit more informed than you were before, and maybe loading screens might irritate you just a little bit less. And as I said in the beginning of the video, I know it's not going to make them okay, but knowing more about why can make it just a little bit less awful. Have you ever customized your system in order to optimize loading times? Let's have a discussion in the comments about that. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please click the like button, it helps us a whole lot. And if you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so, because we upload brand new videos every single day of the week. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video, and we will see you again right here next time on Gameranx.